Okay, so before I begin, I'm just going to say that my microphone isn't great. Sorry about that. I'm not using my better microphone for reasons I'm not even going to get into. Also, this video is going to be a bit up and down and meandering around, and therefore, if you want me to just say that David Lammy is wrong and he's a reverse racist, then you're not going to enjoy this video. And if you want me to say that David Lammy is right about everything and that white people are evil, then you're not going to enjoy this video. However, if you just want to hear my opinions and allow them to inform your own and leave your thoughts below in the comments, that would be ideal for me. Anyway, so in an upcoming video on Corbyn, I will say that I think David Lammy would be a good leader. And then shortly after I recorded that, he got in trouble for calling Stacey Dooley a white saviour and criticising comic relief. At the same time, I saw a video called The Problem with David Lammy. And you know when you're watching something and you think it might be at least a bit impartial, but then you find out it's by a literal fascist? Well, maybe I shouldn't call her a fascist. I'm sure she prefers to call herself alt-right or an identitarian or some other politically correct term that fascists are using nowadays. Her name is Laura Towler? I can't remember. By the way, I'm only going to briefly respond to this video because I think it helps to frame the debate, but I am by no means implying that everybody or even a significant proportion of people who had a problem with Lammy's comments are necessarily fascist. But if you aren't a fascist, then you shouldn't have a problem with me responding to one, so let's jump in.
So here we have David Lammy, who was born in England after his family were very kindly offered citizenship here. He was born in a first world country, surrounded by opportunity and our incredible European civilization. He was offered educational, career and economic prospects that he wouldn't have experienced in his native country, and he was granted access to our inventions, our science and our technological advancements. You would think that David Lammy would be grateful for the opportunities that he was granted by the British, that he'd want to thank us in some way for taking in his family and giving him the life he has.
Alright, so like I said, I want to briefly comment on this claim that Lammy and other Afro-Caribbeans should be grateful to the British for allowing them to live on our lovely island. Indeed, they should be so grateful that apparently they aren't allowed to complain about racism. Now, it's worth noting that by the framework that Towler has established here, whether or not racism exists in the UK is irrelevant. I'm sure she would say that the only racism that exists in the UK is against white people, but like I say, according to her logic, it's irrelevant. We have kindly, out of the goodness of our hearts, let Afro-Caribbeans live in this country, so therefore, whatever injustices they face in the UK are already counteracted by the very fact that they live in the UK in the first place. Now, I could talk about the fact that David Lammy is unequivocally British. Indeed, he has lived in the UK for longer than I have, and I'd expect longer than Towler has. The idea that a British person doesn't belong in Britain doesn't make any sense, and therefore the idea that a British person should be grateful to Britain doesn't make any sense, especially seeing as Towler herself points out that the majority of British people actually opposed this immigration at the time.
The British public have always been against mass immigration, and they've always been ignored.
Indeed, in that sense, it is white British people who have more cause to be grateful. Not only are we lucky enough to have been born in this rather nice country, but we're also lucky enough to not be judged by racists because of the colour of our skin or where our parents come from. But I want to start by unpacking the claim that Afro-Caribbeans should be grateful that they are allowed to live in the UK. Particularly that word Afro-Caribbeans, meaning people of African origin who live in the Caribbean, or previously lived in the Caribbean, now, or have origins in the Caribbean. Now, how did people of African origin get to the Caribbean? They were moved there. By whom? British people and other Europeans. For what purpose? To work in various plantations. As paid labourers, I assume. Nope. As slaves. Now here's the thing about slave labour. Like all forms of labour, it produces surplus value. And as with most labour arrangements, there is somebody extracting some of that surplus value. Under wage labour, this is done by the capitalist class who extract the surplus labour after paying the worker compensation for their work. Enough compensation to incentivise the labourer to freely work for the company. However, under slave labour, there is a key word missing from that arrangement. Freely. Under slave labour, the only value that must be paid is for the bare bones sustaining of the slave population. Nothing more, nothing less. And as you'd imagine, that allows for a lot of surplus labour to be extracted. Now, we have to ask, where did that surplus value go? Did it go to the black communities who did the work? Did it go to the islands where the work was taking place? No, it went to the British Isles. Now, all of that money attained by subjugating a massive population of people didn't just disappear one day. It was reinvested into infrastructure and resources and the military in order to subjugate other populations of people. So I would like to ask Towler 3 questions. 1. Does she accept that the reason David Lammy's ancestors were in the Caribbean in the first place was because they were engaged in slave labour? 2. Does she accept that slave labour is very profitable, which aside from anything else is why the British used it, and that these profits went to the UK? 3. Does she accept that this influx of wealth contributed to the UK's considerable wealth? And indeed, an influx of wealth contributing to a country's wealth seems almost tautological. If we accept all of these things, then we must accept that when we, the UK, invited Afro-Caribbeans to this country to partake in the quality of life generally enjoyed here, the Afro-Caribbeans did not owe us any gratitude. Instead, things began to approach fairness, given the origin of our great wealth in the first place. Now, I'm not saying I agree with this notion of redistributive racial justice. There's not some magical scale with white people versus people of colour on it, where the injustices are weighed up and we need to shoot for some kind of equilibrium. That would just be crazy. But that is basically what Towler is saying when she says Lammy should be grateful for living in the UK. Anyway, so that's the fascist response. Time to talk about Lammy's comments. I'm now going to read all of his tweets that I consider to be relevant. The world does not need any more white saviours. As I've said before, this just perpetuates tired and unhelpful stereotypes. Let's instead promote voices from across the continent of Africa and have a serious debate. Hi, at Stacey Dooley. This isn't personal. I don't question your good motives. My problem with the British celebrities being flown out by Comic Relief to make these films is that it sends distorted images of Africa, which perpetuates an old idea from the colonial era. Comic Relief has a huge platform and privilege, and it is a first and major way children learn about Africa. If they only show Africans as helpless victims to be pitied, children miss the broader picture of huge progress in Africa. Life expectancies are up by over 10% in 37 African states. The percentage increase in the GDP of the 11 largest sub-Saharan countries was over twice that of the world average, and remittances from the African diaspora are $9 billion higher than the amount sent in international aid. Comic Relief should be helping to establish an image of Africans, people as equals to be respected rather than helpless victims to be pitied. It would therefore be better for people who actually live there to speak about the continent they know. Many black Brits feel deeply uncomfortable with Comic Relief's poverty porn. It's my job to represent their views, however uncomfortable. They want their children to have rounded views about Africa, and these types of campaigns woefully fail to do that. The history of colonialism in Africa means race is important. Stacey's Instagram posts continue a very long established trope of a white female heroine with orphan black child with little or no agency or parents in sight. Comic Relief do this because it makes people give money. That last point is very important. There are many people who would say that we just shouldn't see race. Race doesn't matter. If the person helping Africans is white or black, how does that make any difference? But of course, most people who are a bit more socially intelligent understand that when dealing with an issue where race has an established legacy, it would be silly to ignore race. You're allowed to see race when racism isn't a problem. Until that point, not seeing race means ignoring the racial dimensions to many aspects of society, culture, and economics. And I definitely think that Lammy is onto a good point when talking about the way Comic Relief presents Africa. And a part of that is the way Comic Relief positions Africa as needing the help of white people. There's a certain essentialism to the way African poverty is presented, where in most other countries we understand that poverty is a small part of that society, which is caused by a variety of socio-economic factors. However, when it comes to Africa, we act as if Africa is just inherently and necessarily impoverished. Comic Relief is never about long-term schemes to reduce the amount of poverty in Africa through sensible evidence-based economic policy. Instead, it is about presenting the perpetual poverty of Africa as something that is dependent on foreign aid for life support. It's almost like we think social science just ceases to exist on this one particular continent. Economics, sociology, political philosophy, all of these approaches are ignored so that we can just throw up our hands and say, hey, it's Africa, what are you going to do? They're just going to magically stop being poor all of a sudden? Just stop being Africa? But when we talk about poverty in the UK, people have their clear opinions. Maybe you think poverty is caused by the remnants of Thatcher's extreme capitalism, or maybe you think it's caused by Tory austerity, or maybe you think capitalism inherently causes poverty, or maybe you think it's all the dependents' welfare queens, or a lack of economic growth in general. Maybe you think it's a combination of these different factors coming together into a horrible economic cocktail. The point is, whatever your opinion is, you understand that it is policy and economics that causes poverty in the UK. But when people talk about African poverty, they're never talking about whether or not Joseph Kabila's newest budget will have a negative effect on employment. And I think it would be good if we started seeing African states as actual states made up of actual people, rather than just one giant blob of poverty porn. And of course, we do need to see African economies as actual economies with labourers and traders and managers and owners. And not only do social sciences not work in Africa, but apparently most natural sciences don't work either, because we're to believe that Africa just has no food. It's just perpetual famine. It reminds me of that Sam Kinison joke where he complains that people in Africa should just move where the food is.
And we were driving out here today across the desert, and it occurred to us there wouldn't be world hunger if you people would live where the food is!
Again, there is little acknowledgement that Africa does have large amounts of arable land, and that many of the famines are caused by economic factors rather than environmental factors. Africa doesn't need Whitey to go out and hand some water bottles. Africa needs factories and office buildings and infrastructure and international trade. Africa needs fair representation, rather than this insulting representation that presents a continent of 1.2 billion people as one giant charity case. And honestly, I'm not surprised that people like David Lammy feel kind of insulted when they see white celebrities using impoverished black people as props for their own virtue signaling. So I know I kind of started this video by saying I wouldn't be 100% pro Lammy, but to be honest, he literally did nothing wrong. I guess I should just say that, of course, there is nothing wrong with white people helping Africa. However, the context has to be taken into account. To suggest that how a rich country like the UK should deal with other countries that the UK played no small part in impoverishing in the first place should not have an element of racial sensitivity seems misguided. Anyway, comment below constructive criticism and don't forget to like and subscribe.